You're listening to All Things 3D, where we talk about the world of fabricating, designing, and capturing in the third dimension.
Say hello to the latest member of the RoboReady family. Presenting the TAL Series 9. Every bolt, every component has been meticulously designed. TAL will obey any command. It lives to serve.
Serve this.
We are now getting reports of such robot violence.
TAL features convenient transport handles.
Why did they add handles?
As well as easily replaceable parts.
Hey, I'm using that.
And is built from impact-resistant materials.
Booyah!
Trouble-free service is guaranteed by our RoboRecall program.
Ow, 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 ow. Like that. Robot heaven, I see it. Unstoppable.
Making your life better, one robot at a time.
Morning, everyone. Hi, this is Mike Balzer from All Things 3D, and this is 3D in Review for the, 2 months, the end of February as well as the beginning of March. We're going to talk about GDC today. And as you could tell, I just ran the little demo for a little program that just came out recently called RoboRecall. For those of you who have an Oculus, this actually was pretty cool. I actually enjoyed it. I tried it out last night before going on the show and consumed myself for about an hour. I find that most of these are good for about an hour, but there's plenty to do in it. And let's kind of talk about it a little bit and some of the controversy behind it. Obviously, it's another first-person type shooter. Let me find my mouse here. So obviously the idea is to shoot everything. It's a bunch of robots. So I guess it's not humanoid type characters as we know it. But there's a lot of interactivity. But the problem is, unlike with the HTC Vive, you pretty much have all of your motion and movement in front of you. And that seems to be a concern for some. And those of you who have an HTC Vive, like myself, as well as an Oculus, I have found that to be somewhat limiting from the Oculus side. Now, I have had people point out to me that if I get a third sensor that I can get, what do you want to call it, small room scale type movement. But a lot of the games are not set up to be used in that manner, and it looks like I got. I'm going to go ahead and kill it and just move on to the next item. But it appears that the RoboRecall has a similar feeling to it, so that what happens is that you're confined to looking in front of you. Now, I did notice that if I look behind me where the sensors are less use, it will come up with a message to kind of keep you focused on moving forward. It also limits your controls, so essentially you use teleporting to move around. And even though you have some spatial movement, you will find that it works fairly well in that particular environment. So let's bring up some of the articles that I've seen. This is an article on a review from Upload that gives it a 7, about a 7 out of 10 or something like that. I don't know what their review was, but essentially it talks about, as I have just mentioned, it's like a first-person shooter, very immersive. You do feel like you're part of the environment. A lot of interactivity. You can actually grab the robots. You can shake them. You can pull their arms off. You can also grab bullets. So there's like a bullet time experience as well. At least on my system, I have a GTX 1070. It was extremely realistic. I felt very immersed. I think the graphics were excellent, as I had mentioned last week with the previous version of the John Wick that I thought, to me was a is a murder simulator. I guess you have the same thing here, but even more realistic. However, they chose to use robots, but they gave them a lot of humanoid qualities. Uh, you start off in this little room here. You kind of get an opportunity to work with the controls and the navigation system, and then you jump right into the game. And essentially, you've got to teleport from point to point, and then a lot of these type of robots, as well as smaller robots, come at you. So it's kind of like a swarm type experience, except very immersive. Now, the fact is, I don't know if it was because I had purchased the Oculus hand controllers that it was free, but I do believe that, at least in my case, that it was free and well worth the few minutes or even more if you have time for it to play. But a very good example of the quality that you're now going to be able to see in these type of things is more and more AAA and new indies come aboard using the Unreal Engine. And we'll talk a little bit more about engines a little bit later, as well as architectural visualization. So here's another thing. There's a fix coming, adds 360 play. So as mentioned, it limited to you to be forward looking. Now I guess there'll be a fix that allows you to move around. Now I did see a video that said that this was being used on an HTC Vive. Now more than likely, and I can't think of the name of the patch that you can do in order to buy it and then use it on your HTC Vive, but I have a feeling that's what that individual was using. The fact is that the controllers are different a little bit. I don't know how well that plays out, but it says it's full mod support. Free locomotion viewer system has become one of the first to make mod for the game. So I'm going to be looking into this and talk about it a little bit later. Some of you may have already tried it out and provide me some of your own feedback. But it's a fun little game, and if it's free, it's a great opportunity. Obviously, if you're having to be charged money for it, it's going to be a little bit more. I'm a little concerned, as some others have made the point, that Epic has been leaning towards the Oculus with its demos. We talked about Bullet Train a couple of weeks ago, as well as this being only available on the Oculus. In fact, it was interesting that the Oculus logo came up, I guess Oculus Studios. So more than likely they probably funded to have this made. So don't know, but that's my assumption there. Okay, well, let's move on into GDC. And, obviously this year I'm not there. I'm in my own studio, but like a lot of you, I've been following it. But I have some unique concerns, and that is using a lot of the gaming technology, as I call them, real-time engines, for the use of visualization and now for inside out and external tracking and positional tracking. And so from that standpoint, I didn't see a lot of things. I felt that the announcements of the type of headsets, other than the Microsoft actually showing off some demos of their unit, which I'm very interested in, especially if they're in the $300 to $500 price range. There is strong rumors that it will have the same type of tracking system as in the HoloLens. And if that is the case, I think that's something to look at. I signed up last night. I got a link to be a developer, so we'll see where that goes. If I can get an early release of this sooner than later. But I'm very anxious with that, because if it is true that you don't really need a what do you want to call it, a beefy machine, you could maybe use a smaller high performance tablet, or even one of those Nooks with a battery, and make it completely mobile. Don't know, we'll see in the future, and I will obviously update that as we go along. So some of the items that I just did a search that came out in the news. Obviously, Borderlands was using the Unreal 4 engine. They had a nice little demo. You can find that on YouTube. I'll make sure there's a link in the notes. I won't go over it today. They talked about the Star Trek bridge. A lot of the, since I went last year, there's a lot of sessions that talk about the nitty gritty of using these things. There was some announcements by Cronus as far as the updates to their open, what was it? I can't think of it now. I want to say VX, but that's probably not right. But essentially creating an open standard for virtual reality that can be used by multiple systems. We'll be looking at that probably next week when more information comes out on that. Unity gave their keynote. If you've already been working with the beta of 5.6, you're probably already aware of some of the newer features. Notably, Daydream features will be built in, but if you got the beta now, you've already seen that. And I have made a couple, including my Graveyard VR with Daydream in mind. So that's there. The Oculus has all, or not Oculus, the Epic Unreal Engine also had some major updates. But again, if you're part of the beta, you may have already seen this. I have found with the latest version, which is 4.15, I've been having a hard time converting my, what do you want to call it, tech demo of the Sun Temple to 4.15. It keeps crashing on me. There's supposedly a new update coming out, 15.1, that may alleviate this, but I don't think it's the same problem I'm having. So I'll have to dig a little deeper on why I'm having issues with it. Obviously, there's a lot of things going on, and we'll get into some of the other things I've been working on a little bit later. So, obviously GDC is the place to be if you're into development. The fact is that VR has had a huge presence, not only this year, but last year. There's more going on from that perspective that's not necessarily gaming involved. And obviously, if you are a game developer, there's plenty to see there. You can either get an open ticket. I think we got over the week. Let's say this may be the last day. I don't remember. But if you had a chance to go in the past or this year, reach out to me, give me some feedback on what you thought. In my opinion, there's always a lot to do. I found that going there and walking the floor is not always the best way to get information. A lot of times the people behind that either don't know because they're just representatives, and then you have to find somebody. And a lot of times they're very busy, and then they get back to you anyways. That was been my experience. So we'll see. So let's move on to another item. We talked about Oculus, and probably the big thing with Oculus that they announced was the fact is their Oculus with hand controllers is now $598. And a lot of you are probably going, what? Especially like myself, who just bought the hand controllers at full price, even though he was able to get his Oculus Rift CV on eBay for, what was it? About $450, but I really worked hard at it. And then you add the controllers, and I only spent maybe $50 more plus $50 for shipping. So $100 more than if I would have just waited till now and bought it for $598. Now imagine those over the Christmas period who bought it at full price. I would be pretty angry. And that was one of the comments I made on Twitter, is that it was kind of dumb on their part. I do know that HTC Vive dropped their units for 100, and I took advantage of that during the holiday period. And why Oculus waited to now is, I don't have the answer to that. There's been rumors that they did it to dump off their inventory before, as you're aware, they were sued. And even though a financial settlement was agreed upon, they're wanting to go back and actually block them from selling these further. So maybe this is a way to dump it. I don't have any idea. That's one theory. The other thing is just to be competitive. Many people thought with the money backing through Facebook that they could really push these out at a lower price if they needed to, and maybe they feel they need to. So regardless, if you've been on the fence, I find that the Oculus is very comfortable. I find the HTC Vive is more immersive, in my opinion. It fits better, at least on my face, than the Oculus, but the Oculus is lighter. But to me, it's just a few ounces here or there. There is a new headband coming for the HTC Vive, but that will add to the cost to make it more like the Oculus experience. The hand controllers, it's up to you. They work very well, but the thing that I find a problem is that you don't have full room positional tracking. And as mentioned before, unless you buy a third experimental optical tracker or a camera that you put behind you, and then you can do full. And I have not tried that yet. I will buy that in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll try that out. But it is basically a front playing system. You do have more latitude with the second camera that comes with the controllers, but and you can stand up, and I was able to move around, but it's not the same experience as HTC Vive. But in saying that, if you have a limited space, then this is going to not matter one way or another, because you need at least a 5 feet by 5 feet area with your HTC Vive. And if you don't have that, let's say you're in a dorm room, then this would work just as well. The Oculus Store, I find that most of the titles are somewhat pricey, but the Oculus Store has, you know, a slew of titles, plus you can side load a lot of things if you want to. And you know, there's a lot of good experiences out there. Visually, they look very similar. I noticed though that even though in both of these you have IPD control, I found that there seemed to be more of a black space between the eyes that, in my opinion, was noticeable. And actually, I could see two images. It didn't merge as well, even though I did adjust the HTC or the IPD to mine, which is about 65 millimeters, unlike the HTC Vive. Now, I did buy a new foam padding on my HTC Vive that was thinner, and that does help. So if you do get an HTC Vive, get the thinner padding. They have some memory foam with this nice pleather type material over the top of it. It's porous. It's very comfortable. I've had some issues with regular foam irritating my skin. That does not, and I was able to wear it for hours. And so, as you can tell, I'm kind of biased to the HTC Vive and looking forward to the new headband. And obviously, there was news, and I don't have it up there, but LG has come out with a variant, unknown when they'll be coming out or the price. That is kind of like some people likened it to a welder's helmet that you can actually flip up. But I think that adds to the weight, and they had a counterbalance in the back. So there's also been talk that the actual resolution is about the same as a 25 by 60 screen. Independent, actually, I think it is a single screen, if I remember correctly, with some tweaks in order to improve its latency issues that they have. And one of the reasons they went with two panels is because you can drive with the smaller panels, faster performance. This is one of the reasons that I have been told from an engineering perspective for some vendors. This may or may not be the case, but obviously I have a brief experience last year with the Sony PlayStation. Those of you out there who have a Sony PlayStation, you know, give me a shout out on what you feel your experience is with the Sony PlayStation VR. But from my looking behind the scenes on it, it has an LCD screen with a low latency, but I have a feeling it's very similar to my Pico VR, which is an okay experience, and I like it. The cool thing about the Pico VR is that it's a 4K, but no positional tracking. So that means your screen door effect is very minimal. So I'm looking forward to things coming out possibly from Samsung in the mobile market that may change that. Okay, let's move on into 3D fabrication, a little bit shout back to the past. As you know, I've talked about Ultimaker numerous times, and I was hoping Chris would be on the show. As you can see, notably, he's absent today. Sadly, he had a conflict of interest today, so he won't be here with us. But I wanted to hear his opinion, so maybe next week we'll talk a little bit this more. Ultimaker has filed its first patent, and the reason for this, and they say that the patent is for, do they actually even say, but essentially that it is to help protect them under certain things that they obviously spend a lot of time in design and development with. And even though that they are doing this, this will allow them to continue their open source, which is one of the big things that has made, in a lot of people's mind, Ultimaker a good brand, is that they've been able to provide a lot of the information behind it for updates and so forth. More than likely, it has to do with their dual extrusion. Yes, it does. And their bed leveling features. And they just felt like it's time to protect some of their unique design. And I think you should protect some of your own designs, especially if they're noteworthy and unique. And in some cases, and I have seen it. There's been blatant rip-offs of their design and produced at a lower cost, and maybe this is one way to prevent that occurring, at least in some of their more unique components. But I don't have an issue with this. It's up to you if you feel that there's a need to move on with that. Okay, so let's kind of move on to the next item. Let's see, are we at this particular point? I'm going to stick probably much into the VR particular aspects of 3D visualization right now. And one of the reasons for that, let me bring up my agenda again. Make sure I'm on the right item. Is I feel before you actually push it to a 3D printer, which I have done on numerous occasions, or send it to Shapeways or wherever you want to refine your actual tangible object, it is nice to be able to visualize it. And in the past, that's essentially rotating on a screen your object and kind of getting a feel for it. But now with VR and augmented reality and mixed reality, we can push that into an aspect that we can actually literally look around it in space. And if you have an HTC Vive or an Oculus with a hand controller, you can actually touch and manipulate it. So it really gives you a sensation of an object being in front of you that you can inspect, maybe fit components together, that was not really possible, or at least required you to think a little bit more outside the box. But now we'll be able to bring that inside. More importantly, if you have a client that needs to see it, now they'll have that opportunity without actually having to spend the extra cost at this moment. And this is one of the things that I have been working on and setting up here in Portland, is the ability to visualize conceptual changes. We've been working with an architect with our home here, and he has shown interest in being able to use this for clients because they have found it's very difficult. And with my experience in actually working with an architectural firm, this I found to be the case as well. You have to do a lot of explaining, a lot of illustrations to drive points home through your clients. And this, I think, is just an easy, what do you want to call it, segue of where we can go with virtual reality. So let me go ahead and bring the screen up on this. So these are 3 programs, and I have only tried the first one, but let's jump back to the first panel. And they do work. But some of them, you essentially use Rivet or Rhino, and then you export them kind of like you do with a renderer, and then it just renders them out. Some cases, it's just a 360. It's not a full 3 positional. So it creates essentially stereo equirectangular images. And then you have the rivets. To again, if you're using the cloud-based collaboration software, I'm assuming works with Rivet. Again, I will work with these. This is not a lot of explanation on these, and I will get back with you late. And then Event Dev, I have not worked with it as well, but I will be working with. But what I have, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, is kind of designed my own workflow using SketchUp, because that's what this particular architects, a lot of architects work with it, and Blender and Unreal. And those 3 components, I've been able to actually bring in a design and work with it there. Be able to walk around, in my case, the kitchen. So I'll bring up some images a little bit later so that you can take a look at it. So I find that this is an interesting aspect of virtual reality, and I do know that this is being seen more and more tools are becoming available, and I will update you if you have an interest in this. Also, if you're into visualizing your actual products beforehand, I know that we've talked with Sketchfab and geez, I can't think of the name of them, but I think it's Sketchfab. So essentially a few of these other online websites that allow you to preview your application. They have a VR component to it. Yes, Sketchfab. And we've talked about it before. They have a mobile as well as full web VR functionality now that allows you to put an app up there and add points of visual cues, meaning you can teleport to different locations. So that is available as well. So if you're interested in doing this, the only suggestion I would have is make sure that the number of polygons, if you're going up to Sketchfab, are minimized. They do support a lot of features in it, but if you've been watching the show, you probably already have an account and have already played with it. But a good place to put models, and especially if you're making products, so that people can visualize with them, and you can embed it in your website and other things. So keep that in mind too. And now with their VR opportunities, you'll be able to use that. Now, I think some people have done full rooms, but you again have to optimize your designs to take advantage of it. All right, let's move on to Canvas. And I'm actually going to talk about this a little bit from the Occipital's perspective. I have been working with this product. As you know, I've worked with Occipital for a couple of years now, but what I have found very interesting is that not only can we use it, this particular sensor for 3D scanning, but you can also attach it to an iPad for inside out tracking, for positional tracking. So you can actually move around in a space by peering into your iPad, or if you hook it up to your iPhone 6, 7, 6S, or the plus versions of those, you can actually walk around with this in front of you using the Unity engine or SceneKit. What I find interesting about this product, Canvas, that you see behind me, is that they have provided a service. You scan your room. Now, if you remember, a lot of the scans, and I actually will bring up on mine a little bit later, but in my workflow, actually, I can bring it up now. So essentially, if you look at the screen here, it creates, what do you want to call it, Connect type scan. Kind of looks like clay on the wall. So it's not very defined, but they add a service now that for about $29, you can upload it, and gosh, in most cases, less than 2 days, they will send you a file back to you, both as a 3D file, a SketchUp file, and a DWG file. And the 3D file is a Collada file that you can then bring into your 3D modeler or SketchUp, or some form of can support DWG, and work with it to, in my case, do remodeling, retexture, add new items to it. But to me, this is about the lowest cost way to scan an existing environment and then bring it in and getting architectural components that you can use in architectural applications. So if you have a scanner already, it's free. Check it out. And again, like I said, it's $29 per scan. There might be a bundle price. Currently, you have to scan each room individually and then tie them together, but they may provide a service that if you do multiple rooms, they'll actually stitch them together to create a full floor plan of your existing space. But as mentioned, here it is, the $29. If you take this into, let's say, SketchUp, you can then convert it and then bring it as a Collada into Blender, which can export it to an FBX, which then you can bring into Unreal. And then you can apply unique textures through Unreal. Now, there's some other tools out there, and we'll talk about them a little bit. As you know, I've used 3D Coat, where you can create environment textures, which are very important, I think, providing some realism. It adds to the time. If you just want a quick and dirty thing, there are some utilities out there that can go from SketchUp directly to your VR experience. I find them somewhat limiting in their realism, but very quick. Once you're in SketchUp, you can go right into it. So something to look at. And I'll go ahead and run a little demo so you can see how it works. Make sure I still have my screen. So give me a moment. Okay, so here we go. All right, so you should see my screen behind me. And let's find the little icon. There it is, Canvas. So here are some that I've already done. I could actually do my tech cave here, but I have limited space. So, but essentially, well, I guess I can do it real quick. I'll do a little bit about some space. It says I have to charge it. Oh, well, I guess I won't be. Make sure that your sensor is charged before doing a demo. So let me look at one that I just finished. Let's see, here's so I did this on February 25th. So this is the, my back room area. That's not the one I want. Let's do this one. This was the one I did of the dining room, which is was converted, and I'll be able to bring that up a little bit later. But essentially, as mentioned, you have the standard scan type effect. Kind of looks clay. It's a little bit lower resolution. Keep in mind that this is just the one that you see on your actual iPad itself. This is not the one that comes back from them. You do get a higher resolution version, and more importantly, even though you don't see it here, you do get it with textures. So you can get a very crude VR experience by just dumping the mesh from the Canvas application directly into your either Unreal or the Unity engine, and then walking around in it. But again, it's somewhat crude, and then if you want to make changes to it, this is probably not the best way to go. So as mentioned, you can get a 3D, and let's see if I can bring up some information. I'll do that in a moment. But so once you finish with the scan, then you click on Scan to CAD, and then you just resend it to them. And depending on the size and the capacity of your particular scan, some of these are about 70 to about 150 to 200 megabytes, and the performance of your broadband connection will depend on how long it takes to get to them. I think in my case, about 5 minutes, uploaded it to them. And as mentioned, I've gotten this back in as little as a day, sent it over the weekend and got it back late Monday, which I was a little surprised with. So I was able to work with both the kitchen, and then I'll bring up some images of what I've done with that here in a moment, as well as the living room, and I'll be working in the dining room. And again, I will add all these together, and next week I'll show you an actual tour using the Unreal Engine. Okay, so that's basically it. So if you've got a sensor already, it's a no-brainer. Application's free, $29 per scan. Well worth it. I don't know if you've ever taken and tried to convert scans into more accurate models. It is a little bit of pain to clean up. They've got some proprietary tools as well as some human ingenuity that's behind these. So well worth it. One thing that I have suggested to them, obviously you also need an iPad to work with it. And let me jump back to my screen so you can see it. So here it is. So this is using my Neodi mount magnetic mount system, which is essentially 3 magnets with a base on it. Let me line it up. But they, you can use the bracket they have. You don't necessarily have to use my system here. But if you have phones and only have one sensor, this I find to be very useful. You don't have to unscrew it each time. But that's besides the point. So essentially, if you've got an iPad Pro, this thing works well with it. I just have an iPad Air 2, and it functions well, but I guess with an iPad Pro with more memory, or even the iPhones, and I'll bring up the iPhones in a moment, this works well. Again, it only works with the iPad, so if you don't have an iPad, you'd have to buy one. So I have suggested to them, like in my case, I like the iPhone 6s Plus as well as the iPhone 7 Plus, that they should convert this Canvas application to those, because if you already have the phone, then all you have to do is buy the sensor and use it for that. Also, if you have one of the phones, you can then use it for mixed reality using either the Bridge engine or my upcoming Uplay Stealth, which allows you to use the iPhone 7 Plus. And haven't announced it yet, but I'll mention it here. I do plan to provide a free bracket upgrade to the iPhone 8 when that's released. But that's still a month or two off, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as it gets closer to it. So the point is, if they do come out with it with an iPhone, I think that's a perfect thing, because then essentially all you have to do is buy the sensor, which is about $325, $350. You can find them on eBay even less than that, and it's perfect for this. So if you're an architect or even an interior designer, I think it's somewhat of a no-brainer. There are other solutions out there, but they're normally more expensive. So and I'll show you in a moment here the results of that as I get through the rest of the items and get into the tech closet a little bit later. So big thumbs up on it. As you know, I've been a fan of Occipital, and I think for a small company, they've come out some very innovative things. All right, let's move back into to our next item here. Let's see. And well, I guess we're actually at the point that we can talk about our tech closet. So let's kind of talk about different applications that can be used for this, and we'll start right off with SketchUp. If you're not familiar with it, SketchUp has both a pro version, which I think is about $600 to $700 if you buy that, or they have the free SketchUp Make. Now, I have noticed already that if you don't have the pro versions, as far as the design tools, there are some limitations. But I find that it, especially if you have to work with a lot of architects who may be using it as well, it's a great little tool, and I personally like it. It's a little different than other 3D applications, but after a while you do get used to it. Like I said, there is a free version of it. One of the things that's really nice about it is the way that it creates models is unique, but more importantly, it minimizes the number of vertices as well as polygons. So it keeps your models fairly minimal in their export as a collada file. If you have Make, if you have the pro version, you can go directly with an FBX. But again, if there's something that you're going to use on a day-to-day basis, which I probably will have to use in the future, spend the $600 to $700. Some of the other tools from a design perspective is having actually Boolean tools to add, subtract different objects together. I found that the current version is not as intuitive. There are ways to get around it, but not like in some of your other modeling applications where you have Boolean, you just subtract something from another, and you have a new object. Now, in saying that, there are tons of models out in their store. I mean, if you've already played with it, you know what I'm talking about. Pretty much everything from buildings to actual furniture. A number of professional, not professional, retail stores have now created, or there have been people who have created models of the particular items like sofas and couches. One of the things we're looking at is Crate and Barrel, and there are plenty of furniture items from Crate and Barrel that have already done, and you can just import them in. So saves you a lot of time from a modeling perspective. And if you're not that experienced with it, it's a great way to get introduced to it. So again, using something like Canvas to create the external structure or interior structure of a room, and then populating it with models from their store, and then creating some basic models of your own. I think nothing beats SketchUp, in my opinion, especially of the price of free for SketchUp Make. And I think you should try it out. Again, it only has a collada export if you have the free version, but there's another product out there, you may be familiar with it, that's also free, called Blender. It's a perfect tool. In fact, it's come a long way, so it's not as difficult to find features, but it is a kitchen sink type application, so it does take a little bit of time to get used to it. So learn your workflow really quick. For instance, in this case, all I wanted to do is export FBXs. I could have done more with it, but you bring it in as a collada file, and I found that it accepts collada files pretty well. And I have found issues with other applications that import collada not working so well. This does work very well. Now, what's interesting is that collada files are also accepted in Unity now, so you don't even have to go to this. But if you're using the Unreal Engine, which only supports OBJ, does it even support OBJ? I think it does. And FBXs, this might be the route to go. In fact, it's pretty much the only route. There is an FBX exporter you can get directly from SketchUp, but I found them no pun intended, to be somewhat sketchy. There is some paid versions as well, but Blender is free. The workflow, which I'll talk about next week, is very simple. Import it. Make sure you select whatever you want from the model and then export it as an FBX. Couldn't be any more difficult. It does seem to ensure that the textures, at least in Unreal, were brought in, and then you can obviously modify those within Unreal, which is what I did. So there's an extra step there. So I'm trying to figure out a way to bring in all the proper textures and then only change those out maybe in another application, but I'll see about my workflow as far as going through environmental textures in the future, and we'll bring that up at a later date. But if you want something that just kind of brings things in so you can basically walk around in it, again, Canvas with the structure scanner, the SketchUp, Blender, Unreal, or Unity, whichever you choose, whatever you're familiar with. And as mentioned, here's the Unreal. You can go ahead. They have the latest version 14.5. Basically, you can export to about anything now. You only have, it's free until you start making a lot of money with it. And I think you have to have over $100,000 in revenue, if I remember correctly. There's Unity, which we talked about in the past as well. They came out with 5.5, but there's also 5.6 that's going to be coming out very shortly. That offers the full Daydream. If you're into creating mobile experience for Daydream, that'll be available. But as far as the Oculus and the HTC Vive, that's already included with it. Something else is Lumberyard, which seems to be gaining some traction, especially if you need the support of the cloud and Amazon's cloud in particular. This seems to be gaining traction. If you remember, we talked about before, it's based on the CryEngine, and they've kind of taken it in its own path now. And when I was first talking about the FBX tools, import tools were very limited. That has improved. They also have a newer version of the Oculus and HTC Vive export functionality. So give it a try. It's free. Keep in mind, and maybe it was just something that I missed, I tried to download it. I don't have a lot of space on my C drive. So make sure you've got at least 8 gigs on your C drive. Otherwise, you won't be able to use it. In the past year, and you probably can still do it, you can download the full executable and then put that on whatever drive and then let it install from there. Whatever their new auto install goes directly to your C drive. Again, I didn't play with it. I don't know if that's just myself, but currently, if you don't have a large C drive or your primary drive, that could be a problem, as it was in mine. So I wasn't able to have it loaded last night to give it the new version a try. I have played with the other one. It is different than the CryEngine in some respects. Some of the tools are different. So if you're familiar with the CryEngine, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, there is some differences. Okay, I don't want that. So again, we talked about the CryEngine. I have worked with this in the past. You know, if you remember the meme that went around, if it can run on CryEngine, basically, or can it run on the CryEngine or Crytek or whatever they called the game, then I guess you had a fairly good machine. One of the notable features of the CryEngine is it's very hyper-realistic environments, but as you know, Unreal as well as Unity have been catching up. The other important thing now is that this version is free, free to use and free to license until you reach a certain revenue point as the Unreal. So that's a good plus. In the past, you could get it for free and then it increased in price and now it's back to free, or in fact, I think they dropped it completely. So it's good to see that it's back. There are other engines that are out there that are more proprietary. We've talked about Stingray in the past from Autodesk. That's a unique engine, and I was able to bring some stuff in that, but it only works for the HTC Vive or Oculus, which is kind of like the CryEngine and Lumberyard as well. But I didn't feel that there is any significant features in Stingray to support that, and it's actually a $30 subscription, so it's not even free unless you're a student, and so that could be a problem where some of these others are free. So keep that in mind if you're already in let's say a Rivet or a Maya or a 3D Studio workflow, maybe Stingray may be the choice to go with there. Okay, so that's about it. Let's see, I've got a few more items to talk about. So let's see. Quick episode when it's all by myself. Let's see. Oh, that's what I wanted to show. So let me go ahead and bring that up real quick in the background. Let me bring my screen up. So as mentioned, I have been working on using these tools that I just discussed, and I'll show you some of the results of that here in a second. So we'll start with the VR kitchen, and I'll just bring them up and show them in my actual folder here. Okay. All right, so we'll start with these. So this is within SketchUp itself. Okay. Okay. It's interesting, I guess, the window viewer in Windows 10 does not show up in my mixing system. So, all right, so here we go. So here is the kitchen I was talking about. This is the output from Canvas. Now I have already started to change some of the textures. It basically comes without textures, but it does go through and develop layers for you. So you even get that option from bringing it. So for $29, you really get a lot for your money. The fact is, I don't know if you've, well, like I said, converting it takes time. Sometimes time is money. $29 is not a lot to spend to get a full conversion. And so it looks like this. This is actually an image here. Maybe next week I'll show the whole workflow or maybe do a separate tutorial on that. But this is what you get back. And then obviously you can modify it, as you'll see in a moment. So let me move on to another image. So here we go. Here's a render. There's a lot of low-cost renderers, photon-based renderers. This one is called Ambient Occlusion Pro, if I remember the name, which also does color textures. It's actually, no, this was done in Poser because that's a Poser figure. But obviously, once you can export it from a Collada perspective, you can then bring it into other tools. With Collada, you can actually, or excuse me, Poser, you can bring in actual figures from that and place them in there. So here's an earlier design. And then obviously here are some of the textures. So this are some of the results that I have from, like I was talking about, some of the tools. And this is one of the renderers. I think it's like $100, but you can use it for free for like a week. So this is the kitchen now. This is some of the things that we're planning to do with it, putting certain tiles. So we basically ripped out, used a different marble. Actually, it's a quartz-based countertop. But this is all designed. So this gives somebody like my wife who, you know, as many people, they have some ideas, but it's very difficult to see from a 3D perspective. But now you're able to visualize their ideas. So some of the things that she had ideas with, she goes, oh, I really don't like that. So we're able to proof them out before even heading out to some of these, I guess they're tile designers, not necessarily designers, installers. So having an idea, so I'll be able to send these to the tile designer once we decide on what we want to do, and then they'll have an idea to work off of. Also, the fact is SketchUp, it does work with exact measurements. So if you have the correct tile size and you create your objects that work correctly, and then the textures that go along with it. For instance, this here, I don't know, do we have my, yeah. This here shows multiple tiles. It's actually a multi-panel texture. So I just made sure that my object fit them exactly. Unlike other 3D applications, your wrapping tools, there isn't really something like that in Sketchbook, or at least I have not found it. So you're limited to basically placing it on the object and then modifying the size of that texture relative to the object. And so it's a little cumbersome, a little different, but yeah, obviously you can get things to work. But that does bring issues when you're working in, let's say, Unreal, which is looking to determine how these textures are applied. I also found that UV mapping, if it overlaps, can be a problem. So sometimes be very careful in how complex you make things in Sketchfab. You may want to bring it in Blender and make some changes there that are more, as I call it, Unreal friendly. All right, so here are a few other images. Here's the sink. So again, this is a $99 application. There's another one that I've been looking at as well. So if you need something to create very quick photon rendered output, there are a lot of tools out there, some free, some for, like I said, for less than $100 that can provide some really good visual qualities. But again, that's only a 2D visualization. So let's move into, let's see what I'll bring up the stereo pair for us. So here you go. So here's a stereo pair. This is brought into Unreal, into the standard motion controller demo that is provided with the Unreal Engine. And there you go. So I added a couple of lights, and as you can tell, the textures seem a little, well, in my opinion, fairly nice. Now, these are the standard textures. They're being lit. But the cool thing, if you've already played with Unreal, is that you can add so much more. For instance, in SketchUp, you don't have control over some of the other features like specular. What's some other features? You do have some translucent qualities, but there's something, bump maps, normal mapping, that's not available in SketchUp. Now, some of these auxiliary renderers do have that capability, but in SketchUp itself, you don't have an actual holder for that. Unreal does, so you might want to consider that. So if you wanted to have some surface texture, there's some great applications out there. I just downloaded one the other day. It was like $70, QX or something. I can't remember maybe not even pronouncing it correctly, but it's reasonably priced, but they kind of work in Photoshop. So if you have Photoshop already, it's a great tool. And more importantly, it provides normal mapping that can be converted to bumps if you want to do that. Or it has some actual vertex and UV mapping tools that all work in Photoshop. Kind of a cool tool. And as I've talked about many times before, you have 3D Coat, which not only does texture mapping, texture painting, but can also do normal mapping. It can do texture baking. Some of these features that are very important if you want to optimize the performance without having a lot of mesh detail. So here's a stereo render. So if you've got your glasses on, you can put that behind you. Actually, I don't have my screen full size, so it may not work for you. Here is a single image render coming directly out of the Unreal screen. And actually, I captured these within the system itself. So if you have an HTC Vive, there is a screen capture built in. So you can walk around it and do screen captures, which I think is kind of cool. And then here is my hands in the demo itself. So I'm actually inside of it. And again, the textures here are those that come with SketchUp, so they're not very good. I have since then created new ones, as you saw in the previous render, that I have not brought into Unreal yet. But again, keep that in mind as you become more and more complex in how you create your meshes in SketchUp and also what you assign for textures, that could come back to haunt you. I noticed in my living room example, which I'll show some images to you here shortly, that was a problem. So, and here's a stereo version of that. But again, these can be captured while you're walking around. And with the HTC Vive, I've got about a 5x8 area that I can walk around in my studio. But you obviously can make this as large as you, about a 10x10 or even a little larger. I have found that there is a limitation on the light towers and how far you can put them out. It's about 15 or 16.5 diagonally distance between the two. And I already came up against that. So I had to mount something directly from my ceiling coming down to hold the light tower to ensure. And you do notice that through vibration in your hands and what you're visualizing. So it can be somewhat VR sickness inducing. So keep that in mind. Either use stands if you have them, or in my case, just mount a pole up into the ceiling and then mount it with one of those multi-positional tripod heads. And that seemed to work well for me. Okay, so that's my VR kitchen. And like I said, I did the living room. I have not done the dining room yet. That'll be the project this weekend. So let's see what I have for scans here. So again, here are some of the textures that I've created. And here are some of the renders. So the idea is that we're going from a conventional fireplace to a gas. Like I said, many of the models are available in Sketchfab. In this case, this particular model of this gas fireplace was available. Again, we're doing the same kind of tiling. So here it is. Notice though that my tiling on the outside of here is just the color texture. I did not actually add more information on the actual tiling and the size of the tilings as I had done already in the kitchen, which I did last night. So that'll come in here so you can actually see some segmentation. And again, create your bump variations so that you can then bring in an Unreal and then show actual depth. Same thing, these tiles here, even though they do have somewhat of 3D quality, if you rotate in it, it's just a flat plane. Again, use normal mapping or bump mapping to create some surface. These are also translucent, which really doesn't come out here. Again, with specular, that would make that more dramatic. So what else do we have? Here's a nice little bird's eye view. So again, this is a low cost little photon-based renderer. You can use HDR and IBLs with it, which is kind of cool. Actually, this is the one I didn't want to show. Is it? I don't know if you noticed that my texture is cut off on one side. I did catch that later on, but I don't know if let's see if this is it. No, none of these. Oh, well. So I have corrected that. But basically, a lot of these are just decals that I applied. And for instance, the image there, I created a small rectangular mesh and then just applied a decal to it. And so it's very easy. Now, keep in mind, I did create, and maybe that's part of the issue, you can create components. So let's say an image or the fireplace is now a component. The quartz base is a component. I found that these created problems for me. For instance, in here I have a couch. This was one of the models from SketchUp itself. That's a component. When I brought it into Unreal, all the texture UV mapping was wrong. The ones that did show up properly were the very simple ones that were decal based, very basic meshes. So keep that in mind. That I don't know if it's because of the components or the fact is they're just a little more complex. But these did not come out properly, and I'll have to figure out why. I did notice that if you just group items, they seem to work better. So keep that in mind as well. Components may need to be broken down and then regrouped. So something to keep in mind. Here are some of the textures that I created. There are some applications out there. In this case, most of these are decals that are just used over and over again. I did notice that, for instance, my flooring here, let me bring that up. I used a large series of of actual boards in order to create a larger mesh to give it a more realistic feeling. Let's see if we can go back to one of these. Yeah, I think this is the one that actually uses it. So as you can see here, it gives a more realistic surface on the lower portion of or the floor itself. Now again, Sketchfab does not have the ability to add specular, shininess, things of those natures that are available in Unity. So keep that in mind. Develop, either use the built-in algorithms that provide like random noise or whatever that are built into these tools, or derive your own bump maps or normal maps, or your specular texture or whatever. I mean, if you have some experience in 3D, if not, I'll go through and show how these can all be done at a later date. But that adds, for instance, this floor actually has some gloss, but that's lost in this renderer because it doesn't have the ability to add specular or a shiny component. And same thing with metals. These are certain placeholder values that can be added to Unreal. And then obviously you can then add other components like actual animated fires and things like that that I had not actually done at this particular point. So right now I'm just trying to get it quick and dirty components that I can bring in so that I can send it off to the tiler so that he has a much better idea of what we want in our home. Also, I'm working with an architect to give them a better idea of what we want. And most importantly, the feedback from an architect to another client. So the end goal in this is to provide a demonstration at the upcoming on, let's see, is it March 13th, the Portland VR. It's already, I think, over 100 people coming to it. They have a $1,300 user base here in Portland. They also have, I don't know if it's every month, every quarter, but they have Home Improvement Expo. So I'm thinking of renting some space and actually setting up a VR cave so that people can come in and experience some of these things and walk around in them and show some of the workflow that's possible, and maybe get the architect that I'm working with as few as other people like the builders to come out and actually sponsor this. So that's part of my idea, and well, we'll see where that goes. And obviously my final thing that I'll be doing before the 13th is taking a version of this as a collada file and bringing it into SceneKit, which is Apple's, I call it 3D visualization engine, and creating a walk place that you can use with the bridge engine so that you can use an iOS device and be able to walk around. And as you know, if you've been following the show, I have been doing this for, gosh, about a year and a half now, right? Since 2015. So take it to its next level. And if you're aware or not aware of, Occipital is going to have some surprises in the next coming months with their new, what they call their core, which is essentially a better version of the structure sensor, lighter, that'll be available to OEMs, that'll provide much better tracking. And again, catering to iOS, but there are other surprises in the future, which I can't tell you at this point. But that'll come out soon. So that's what's coming up. For those of you who are at GDC, write to me, let me know what you felt about GDC. If you saw something interesting, let me know about it. I will probably be streaming next week, and then on the 13th, I'm going to be streaming live the event. Their keynote speaker is a project manager for Magic Leap who quit and has created a startup here in Portland. He'll be their keynote speaker, so that should be interesting. So, come back. I'll make sure to post a few days beforehand when the event will take place. I do plan to stream it in 360 using that small little 360 camera with an iPhone, so that it'll be streamed through the YouTube Live using the equirectangular function that is available to it that I experimented with a couple of weeks back. Seemed to work fine. Should work okay. Quality of the audio will be somewhat limited unless I can figure a way to bring in external audio while I'm doing the streamcast. If not, just get ambient room audio. But it should be an interesting experience. I may bring another camera and record the event through a more standardized camera system. So that's about it for this episode. I apologize the last minute not having Chris on. I'm always looking forward to the Print Whispers information for the week, and sadly that won't happen. So maybe you'll have a tip for me to add in the notes or show notes that will be in the YouTube video. Okay, on that note, I think it's about time to say goodbye. See ya next week.